Okay, hello again, everyone. Again, thank you for your patience. We should now have James on board as well. James, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah. Hello, everybody.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so sorry about the delay. A couple of people were messaging that you couldn't hear anything. I wasn't speaking. If you still can't hear anything, then do let us know, as that is still a problem. But yeah, thanks for all coming along. I hope you're having a lovely weekend. It is very warm where I am, so I hope it is all lovely weather where you guys are as well. Today, we're going to be talking a bit about, um, oh, sorry, let's introduce ourselves first. So, my name is Will. I'm the head of consulting here at UniAdmissions. I'm in charge of making sure that we're supporting students in the right way, and all the students that we take on, we really believe in, and we know that they can do very, very well in their applications. And I'm joined by James.
Yeah. Hi, guys. I'm quite impressed by my beard in that photo. Not quite as impressive as yours, Will. But I'm an admissions consultant. So it's my job to have chats with you students and families, find out about your applications and see whether it's we can help you with your application.
Awesome. And today we're going to be talking about basically Oxford or Cambridge. What are the differences between them? Why might you choose one over the other? Next week, we'll be talking a bit about interviews. One thing to say is, as we're going through, if you guys have questions, please do pop them into the Q&A. What we normally do is we go through the whole thing and then take some time at the end to go through your questions one by one, because some of them might get answered as we go. But please, if something pops into your head and you think, actually, I'd like to know the answer to this, do jot it down, pop it in, and then we'll get to that further down the line. Okay, fantastic. So, Oxford or Cambridge? This is a question that a lot of students are struggling with. James, do you get lots of students asking you, what's the difference?
This is a question that I get a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really, really common question, and for good reasons as well. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's tricky because particularly when you're at school, when you're away from that environment, it's difficult to work out what matters, what doesn't, what the big differences are, why you might choose one over the other. And of course, we're not going to be able to cover absolutely everything today, but we're going to do our best in terms of making sure that we can give you at least a better sense as to what you ought to be looking into, what you ought to be thinking about when you're making an application. Okay. First thing to say is there are a few different things to cover. So we'll sort of break it down a little bit in terms of looking at what is different between them, looking at the difference in the courses that they offer. As a bit of a spoiler, that's a very important thing. And then, of course, thinking about what difference it makes to you and your application and your chances, because, of course, that's something that's on a lot of people's minds. So the big differences. Well, ultimately, they're in completely different cities. They're not so far away from each other, but the cities themselves are quite different. So here we've got a Google Maps of Cambridge, and you can see, of course, the colleges dotted around. But whilst your college is important, what the university is important, you are also going to be spending 3, 4, 6 years living in Cambridge, and you want to make sure that's the kind of place that you'd like to live. Equally, you might be more convinced that Oxford is the kind of place you want to go to. The thing that a lot of people say is that Oxford is a city with a university, but Cambridge is a university with a city. Or what that means is Oxford is a bit bigger and there's a bit more to it of its own accord. Cambridge is a bit more made up of the colleges themselves. The key thing, though, is to have a look at both. A map picture, as instructive as it is, doesn't really tell you as much as walking around, getting a feel for the place, and really trying to see how would it fit for you whilst you're there. A lot of people can be quite concerned about sort of travel times. A lot of Oxford and Cambridge applicants are based in London or are international, so we'll be flying into London. And ultimately, they're both about equidistant. If you want to, we're doing it from Trafalgar Square here, but of course, if you're flying into Heathrow or wherever, it's slightly different. But ultimately, it's about an hour and a half either way by public transport, and also about hour and a half either way drive. One thing to bear in mind is that whilst they're relatively quick to get into London, to get from Oxford to Cambridge is a pretty arduous journey. And when I was studying at Oxford, the X5 was quite notorious because that was the rickety bus that took you from one to the other. And that was sort of a 3-4 hour affair. Whilst you're at these universities, there may be times when you go from one to the other. So we often did sporting competitions at Cambridge, or they came to us. So there will be a bit of travel in between. But actually, if you want to save yourself the 4-hour coach, you might be training into London and training back out again. But ultimately, the geography, apologies, isn't the most important thing. One of the more important things is the education that you're getting while you're there, how you're going to be taught. And ultimately, Oxford and Cambridge are share a lot more in common than they have that separates them. So you're going to be taught in a combination of ways. Firstly, you're going to have a lot of lectures. You know, everyone knows what a lecture is. You're in a large lecture hall. This is a pretty nice one, actually. But there are some less nice ones, and you're going to be being taught by a professor at the front. But they also use small group teachings called tutorials at Oxford or called supervisions at Cambridge. Both universities use a combination of these things in order to be able to make sure that you as a student are taking on, handling and developing well with the content, but also exploring outside of the content. That's where the tutorials really come in handy. And again, Oxford and Cambridge do this the same way. So ultimately, this isn't going to change depending on which one you go to. But there are a couple of things that might change. So the last thing really is the accommodation. Overall, you're still going to be living in college buildings. It's still very similar. And actually, it will vary from college to college more than it might necessarily from university to university. The key takeaway here is just go, visit, see what it's like. Again, we could have lots and lots of pictures of different dorms and different rooms, but ultimately the best thing is for you to go on an open day. Hopefully, students will have the opportunity to go to open days live this year. Obviously, that's down to Oxford and Cambridge how they want to do it. But even if you can't make an open day, there's no harm in just traveling up on a day, on a weekend, to get a feel for these places. Okay. So overall, it should be quite clear by now that actually they share a lot, Oxford and Cambridge. And I think, James, you were saying earlier, it's a pretty difficult decision. And this is partly why, because there's a lot that unites them. There's a lot that's more or less the same, or at least you wouldn't notice the differences. And ultimately, what my advice usually is not to look at the university, but to look at the course that they're offering instead. You know, there's very, very strong, distinct differences in the courses, much more so than there are differences between the two. Maybe that you've got a bit of family history, a bit of loyalty to one over the other, and that's fine. But if you don't, if you're completely impartial to which one you go to, you just know that you are very keen to do well academically and you want to do the best you can, doesn't matter which one, then maybe it's the course that you should be deciding based on. And that really brings us on to, you know, the differences is a minor thing. The course is something which, if you take anything away from this talk today, that is the thing to stress. So James, can you talk about some differences between the courses that you can do at Oxford and the courses that you can do at Cambridge?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what you've just said is so important. I think we're going to sort of cover it again, but really making a decision based on the course that you want to study. So for example, you know, if you want to do economics, but you really, really like the maths side, okay, then you might want to do straight economics at Cambridge. But if you're more interested in sort of management side, you might want to do E&M at Oxford. So I think you really, really need to get a sense of the course and the content of the course. You know, for example, a lot of students will ask me about medicine. And like Will says, I think there are a lot more that's similar than is different between these courses. But getting a really good sense of them will help you. So for example, if you're doing medicine at Cambridge, you get an opportunity to do dissection, and you don't at Oxford. So that alone might be enough for you to think, well, actually, I really want, you know, to pursue medicine at Cambridge. So yes, very sound advice, Will.
Absolutely, thank you, thank you. And yeah, like James touched on, there are courses that are offered at one but not at the other. So you can do economics and management, E&M, at Oxford. You can't do it at Cambridge. You can do PPE at Oxford. You can't do it at Cambridge. You can do physics at Oxford. You can't do physics at Cambridge. Equally, You can do natural sciences at Cambridge. You can't do that at Oxford. You can do land economy at Cambridge. You can't do that at Oxford. And so it's really important. And so that is the easiest one, right? It's easy if you know you want to do land economy, so you have to apply to Cambridge. Can be a little harder when you know you want to do maths and they both offer maths. And James really mentioned quite a key thing, that you can look into the details of the courses and see which actually fits better for you. And you can also be a bit strategic as well. So we know that in the example of medicine, there are more places at Cambridge than at Oxford. So generally, there's more competition. We also know that Oxford interviews far fewer of their students. James, what might that mean for a student's application, knowing that Oxford interviews fewer?
Yeah, so I mean, unfortunately, some students end up in the situation where they don't even get an interview. So that's something to consider as well. I mean, ultimately, the reality is you have to be a very, very, very strong candidate to get an offer. But if you're applying to Oxford, to even get through to the second stage, as it were, it's going to be a lot more difficult than sort of Cambridge, where you're very, very likely to get an interview. Yeah,
absolutely. So we've got a bit more on this slide about it. It does vary from subject to subject, but Cambridge is going to be interviewing between 70 and 90% of their applicants across the board. Oxford, it's a very different story. And for some subjects, it's as low as 25% of their candidates they'll actually interview. What this means is Oxford has a really harsh, very sort of quite punitive selection system before you get to interview, which is based purely on your test scores and your GCSEs. So if you're a medic, you're doing the BMAT. If you want to do physics, you're doing the PAT. If you're wanting to do maths, you're doing the MAT. There's a lot of similarity between these names of tests. But if you know you've got strong GCSEs and you're doing well in your test, then you might think, actually, I'm better off going to Oxford, because if I get through to this second stage, I know that a lot of my competition has been filtered out. Equally, if your GCSEs are slightly lower, or you're struggling a bit more with the test, and you know that actually, as soon as you're in front of them, you'll be able to impress them, then maybe Cambridge is the place to apply. And again, this is very much in the case of if it really doesn't matter. If you are very passionate about Oxford or Cambridge for whatever reason, then you might have to have a pretty tough decision between balancing where you stand the best chance and where you want to be. But if you really don't mind, then you definitely want to make sure that you're doing all the sensible things for your application. Okay. We're using English as an example here in terms of courses where both Oxford and Cambridge offer them, but the approach is quite different. So, this might not mean very much to a lot of people here. It depends what you're applying for. But English at Cambridge is not that bothered about linguistics. And so if that is something which you really enjoy about English, then that's naturally something which you're going to think, okay, maybe this course isn't for me. Whereas if we go to Oxford, and we've got Tolkien here, who was, famously very into his languages, there's a big emphasis on linguistics and language. And there will be these differences across the board. There will be these subtle differences, sometimes very subtle, sometimes very clear. And it's a matter of choosing your subject, going through the course explanations, the course details on the websites, and really picking out which is more suited for you and which you'd be better at. We've got a clip here from, I think this is actually an English professor. I can't remember if it's Oxford or Cambridge. But we always often like to include this because there's a bit of a misunderstanding in the application process that the extracurriculars are very, very important. One thing to bear in mind is that these universities are ruthlessly academic. They are very, very interested in who is the best student. I'll let him do the talking actually, because I think he sums it up quite well.
You might need to share your sound, Will.
Thanks, James. There we go. We'll start that again.
I suppose if you
better.
Yeah, good.
Awesome.
I suppose if you are extremely interested and excited by things that are not related to the subject of English, like sport or music or something like that, that's great. But we're probably not that interested actually in that element of your well-rounded self.
Yeah, so what that professor has done there very diplomatically is to say they're not bothered. So yeah, this is a Cambridge English professor, and ultimately, you know, if we go back to these different options for English, you want to be demonstrating that you are the right kind of academic for this. If you go into a interview at Oxford for English and you say how you really don't like languages, you find them very boring, and that's not really the kind of English that you're interested in, they're going to be sat there thinking, well, why is this guy here? Alternatively, if you go to Cambridge and you say the opposite, they're going to be a bit confused as well. They want to make sure that you're right for the course, but also that the course is right for you. You should be applying for something which you are genuinely very, very interested in. And you want to be demonstrating that in your personal statement, in the interviews as well. Okay.
I suppose.
Here we go. So hopefully you're getting the idea that the course is really, really important. Hopefully that's coming across. We'll keep hammering it home, but we want to make sure that that's a key point. But of course, you'll be wondering, well, does it make any difference? We've already alluded to the fact that, you know, there might be a better chance applying to Cambridge than Oxford for medicine. We've also alluded to the fact that depending on your GCSEs and your test ability, it might be that one is better to apply to than the other. The first thing to say is they're both pretty difficult to get into. You know, it's not a matter, you can't sneak your way in. You're going to have to be a very strong candidate either way. And broadly speaking, the competition per place is very similar. There are certain subjects where it varies. It's also worth noting that some courses are exceptionally competitive, and the number of applicants per place is very, very small. So if you are going to apply for one of these, it really needs to be something that you are very passionate about, and you're not just doing it because it sounds nice. Okay. It's also worth mentioning that there are lots of degrees out there which don't align to any A levels. So you might be very good at maths at school, and you might really enjoy maths, and you might think, well, the next logical conclusion is to go in and do maths at university. That might not be the case. You've never done engineering at school, but actually that might be exactly what you're suited to. So it's going to be really important to look not just at the courses, you know, if you're doing maths, physics, and chemistry at A level, don't just look at maths and then physics and then chemistry at university. Have a look at all these new options, these new degrees that are going to be looking into areas which are close, but are actually quite new and might be more suited to you. Lots of mathematicians at school who really enjoy the mechanical side of things go into maths at university and realize it's a lot more pure maths than they'd anticipated. And actually, they might have been much more suited to an engineering course, which is much more applied maths. Okay. So yeah, that's one thing which is key to do. And if you haven't already, I would go to the course pages on Oxford and Cambridge's website and just look through all of them. Even if you know you're going through the L's and it's law and land economy and that's not something you're interested in, just have a look through all of them. Just make sure that there's not something there which might be quite similar to what you're interested in and might actually fit better. Okay. We can see here we've also got some more information about, you know, the differences between different courses. So I said, by and large, the competition is quite similar from university to university, but from one course to another can be really different. So you can see at the bottom here, the 34% acceptance rate for chemistry at Oxford, but only 15% for biochemistry. And again, you need to make sure that it's not just a hard and fast rule, well, any one person has a higher chance of getting in at chemistry, because it might be that actually you would be a perfect biochemistry applicant based on all the stuff you've been doing, but you need to make sure that you know what you're right for and what you're suited for and be applying accordingly. Okay. It's worth saying, and of course, different students take years out for different reasons, but it's worth saying that overall, unless you have a really good reason for it, you're probably better off not taking a year out for something STEM based. And again, if you have a really good reason, if you're doing something really productive with that time, doing something very academic, which is going to help you benefit in your subject, then that's fine. But the problem is, if you say you really want to do maths, you're telling them on the personal statement you really want to do maths, you're telling them in the interview you are so passionate about maths, but you spend a year not doing any maths, there's an incongruency there, which is going to seem a bit strange to the admissions tutors. Okay. And here we have a slide about the competitive courses. So E&M, which James mentioned earlier, that is very, very highly sought after. Lots and lots of candidates each year, and naturally the competition is high. What we see is, so E&M has a test called the TSA, the Thinking Skills Assessment, and this is shared amongst a number of subjects. So PPE do it, geography now do it, the psychologists will do it. So lots of different subjects are doing it, but you notice for the courses which are more and more competitive, like E&M and PPE, the TSA scores are higher and higher and higher. So a competitive TSA score for one subject is not necessarily a competitive TSA score for another. Computer science is also, and computer science has become a course over the last 5 years, which has just become more and more popular. At Oxford, it is pretty competitive too, but Cambridge, it's jolly competitive. And it's worth bearing in mind, the competition is not people who are, bad candidates. These are all, I would say 90% of the people who apply are fiercely strong candidates. So it's not an easy competition, but there's a few ways which they use to pass between all these students with straight A stars, straight perfect grades. Which brings us quite nicely to our pie chart. If you've come before, you'll have heard this before, so you don't have to pay too much attention, but it's really important that students who are thinking of applying this year know what matters in their application and know how they're being judged. Because ultimately, how can you do well in something if you don't know how you're being tested? So James, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do love a pie chart. So I think really the takeaway from this is that academics are very important, but actually they're only a small part really of the overall sort of application. So what we're doing here with the pie chart, we're thinking about the different parts of an application and how the universities weight them relative to one another. Now, it does vary slightly from sort of course to course, but this is a really good rule of thumb that we can use. And essentially, your grades, so your GCSEs, your predicted A-levels, if you're applying in year 12, they account for 30% of your application. Your admissions test accounts for 30%, and your interview also accounts for 30%. And then that final 10% we call sort of everything else. So we're thinking about your personal statement, academic references. So really, what I say to students is, rather than get sort of bogged down in the real sort of minutiae of data and things, the reality is, if you're going to get a place at Oxford or Cambridge, you have to be a really, really strong candidate. There's no sort of trapdoor entrance into Oxford or Cambridge. You just essentially have to be a little bit better or at the top of the other candidates in your cohort. So this is about how you're preparing effectively. You've got to focus on your academics, but you've equally got to focus on the other parts of your application.
And one of the key things here as well is that yellow segment, the everything else, that incorporates sort of the personal statement, the teacher references. And I know that certainly from when I was applying, so much time was spent on the personal statement. So much time was spent on the personal statement, and the tests and the interviews was sort of an afterthought. Really needs to be the other way around. This is going to vary a bit depending on the subject. So if it's a humanities, maybe that everything else section is a little bit bigger. But if it's a pure, engineering maths, it's going to be even smaller. So it's so important to be allocating your time, and as James says, make sure that you are a strong candidate. There's no other way around it. Okay, and that is so well demonstrated by the data. So here we've got the results from the MAT, which is, as you can see, taken by people who are applying to Oxford with maths or joint honours maths degrees. And you can see that if you're no good at the test, you're not getting anywhere. If you're the best at the test, you're almost guaranteed an offer. You are guaranteed an interview. So you can see as soon as you've scored above 76 on the MAT, you have got an interview, or for that cohort at least. And of course, the test changes each year, the difficulty of it changes, but it's all in proportion to the rest of your cohort. But you're really going to stand out. You know, when you're at the average score, which is around 41 to 45, if we look at the distribution, maybe 36 to 40 as well. If that's what you're getting in the MAT, look how small your chances of getting an interview or even getting an offer are. Whereas if you push it up to around the 60 level, you've got a 2/3 chance of getting an interview and basically a third chance of getting an offer. That is an enormous difference that you can make by focusing on this test, revising, learning, practicing, making sure that you know it back to front. And yeah, we can see here that every year, and you know, I can say this very confidently, this is the same every single year. You will see that the higher your score, the more likely you are to get an offer, and you'll see that, you know, the people who are getting offers are scoring substantially above average. And you can, as it says at the bottom here, if you're scoring 80 above on the MAT, it's not a 53% chance of getting an interview. It's a 53% chance of getting in. It is that test is definitely a sort of a barrier. If you don't give it the right amount of attention, it is going to get in the way of your application. But if you give it the right amount of attention, this could be your, you know, your ticket in basically. The caveat, of course, you still want to be pairing that with a good rest of your application. But each year we see more and more this test is becoming a very important part of things. So to wrap up, because we've talked about quite a lot. We've talked about the application, we've talked about the weightings, we've talked about Oxford and Cambridge, we've talked about, you know, quite a few different things. Again, key takeaway is find that course that is right for you and apply for it. If there are courses which are offered by both, spend time researching them, spend time looking into it, look into the nuances and see which is right for you. Don't just carry on doing what you're doing at the moment. If you've been doing whatever it is, French at school, don't just do French at university. It might be that there's some kind of combination which is much better for you. If you've been doing geography at school, don't just do geography at university. Have a look at all the options. There's so much out there. What you don't want to be doing is be in 1 year in, see your friends doing something else and think, actually, I wish I'd known about that. That looks really interesting and really fun. One key thing which is definitely going to come up at the interviews, whether you know it or not, they are looking into how motivated you are and how much you want to study the course that you study for. So having a clear sense of why you want to do it, it's not only going to help you in terms of grounding yourself in your application, grounding yourself over the next 6 months, but it's also going to mean that it shines off and it rubs off and they will see it come through at the interview. And lastly, like that professor was saying, you know, you're more than welcome to be doing all manner of other stuff in your own time, but it's not going to mean that much in your overall application. If it's not relevant to your subject, and so an example of something which is relevant is if you're interested in PPE and you've been doing lots of MUN, that is directly relevant to the course that you're getting into. But if it's not relevant, it's not going to make a difference. And actually, certain students that we speak to are really busy with lots and lots of extracurriculars. But if you're serious about this application, it might be that you have to drop 1 or 2 of those to make time for your application in order to do it properly. You're going to have a lot of time once you're there to do all the extracurriculars you like. So if you're going to sacrifice it for 6 months for the opportunity to get in, that is definitely worth it. Okay. So you might be wondering, you know, hopefully you're thinking, how helpful, what a lot of information. I know a lot more now than I did at the start. If not, then we've done something wrong. But you might be wondering what to do next. And of course, there's a lot of different ways to approach this. Different schools will approach it in different ways. Different individuals will approach it in different ways. And what we wanted to do is basically take you through how we approach it. We take a lot of time gathering the data. We take a lot of time looking into this and making sure that everything we do is based on the facts. And then from there, we design programs to make sure that students come to us who are driven. And I repeat, you have to be driven. But if you are, then you have everything you need to be able to do very, very well in this process. And I'm going to let James take us through the program.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we are very much a prep school, so we have these programs of support for students. They have certain elements to them. You know, one is one-to-one tuition. I think the benefits of one-to-one tuition are quite clear. You know, it's having somebody be able to work with you and identify your strengths and weaknesses within your application, and then work on improving those with you. So it may be in the case of the BMATs, you know, perhaps you're really, really good at section 2, but we identify early on that actually your essays need a lot of support. I mean, having that information and being able to work on it is really, really important, I think. So, yeah, one-to-one tuition is quite a key part of a program.
Okay, next slide.
Excellent. So, yeah, so this is very well timed as well. So, yeah, after every session with the tutor, I mean, I think it's really important that you are engaged throughout your program. So after every session with a tutor, they produce a report for you. So detailing what you've done together, you know, what you're doing well, and what you need to continue to improve. I think this is important. Oftentimes parents will say, well, you know, how can I be involved in this process? How can I be kept up to date? And these lesson reports really are there to give you, the student and the family, a really clear understanding of how you're progressing, what's going well and what needs further improvement.
Yeah, and on that note, so this is taken from a mock interview session, but it's so important to, outside of those tutorials, be working on things. And then James will explain how we help with that later. But we're not looking for students who, as soon as they leave their tutorial, they sort of switch off, don't think about it again until the next one. You really need to be very motivated, very driven. You are in charge of this, very much so. So if you're wondering if this is right for you, the first thing to think is, am I going to be committed to it? But yeah, James, resources.
Yeah, so absolutely. So we have some very popular hard copy textbooks. A lot of students are aware of some of these. But we also have a portal. So it's our preparation portal. And I like to think of this really as the hub of a program. So it's where you would be spending a lot of your time if you were to sort of join a program with us. So this is where we have our academies, where we're sort of breaking down the different tests or the interviews, the personal statement. This is where we do sort of learning for the tests, where we are revising, so working through question banks for the tests. And then we have a timed mock testing suite as well.
Yeah,
so the idea being,
hold on, before you get too far.
Yeah.
We've got a little video so that people can see this as you're explaining. But James was explaining it so well, but I thought a visual cue might help. Here we go.
Yeah, okay, so yes, absolutely. So we've got the Learn, Revise, Simulate. So the idea, you work with your tutor, and then between those sessions, you're continuing your engagement with your preparation by using the materials and the resources. I often say to students that you've got to treat your application almost like another A-level in terms of how you think about it. You need to be engaging really on a weekly basis. I think consistency is so important in this process. You know, rather than leaving it till really close to the exams and desperately trying to cram. Whilst there's a correlation between test score and offer, there's also a very clear correlation between the amount of practice and preparation you have and your test score. So I think that you've got to sort of engage with this consistently, and the portal and all of the materials allow the student to do that.
Awesome.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So we also have weekly enrichment seminars, and these are often sort of what we get really, really positive feedback about. So in the case of medicine, for example, every week you'd be coming along to one of the weekly enrichment seminars. So we're aiming to sort of replicate an Oxbridge style tutorial here, where we've got the group of students applying for a subject, and then we have our lead tutor. And in the case of medicine, for example, every week we're looking at a different topic within medicine. And the idea is that over the year, you're sort of building up this really broad understanding of these different topics, developing your interests within your topic, which I think has quite a clear impact on your interview, because it increases your sort of confidence and ability to discuss these topics, more in depth. And equally, it has an impact on your personal statements, because the universities want to see that you are sort of engaging with your subject prior to the application. And you can do that through further reading. You can do that by attending this kind of seminar. Anything else to add on the seminar as well?
I suppose the other thing to say as well is, so almost all of the seminars come with a student handout where you get sort of suggestions for pre-reading and suggestions for further reading. So taking your example of medicine, it could be that 1 week they're discussing like IVF as a medical technology, and you might have never heard about this before. You might have never spent any time about it. So you want to spend a bit of time in advance just familiarizing yourself with the topic, so you make the most of the seminar. And you might go to the seminar and you might enjoy it, but you might actually think, you know what, this isn't something which I'm passionate about. This isn't something that I'm really interested in. And there will be further reading suggestions, but what I say to students is be academically curious, but be academically selective. So don't just carry on reading about IVF if you're not interested. Maybe you went to the one the week before about psychiatry and that was really interesting. So I'd say rather than wasting time reading about IVF, spend more time reading about psychiatry. And then, as James is saying, when you come to the interview, they can tell that they've got a really impassioned student in front of them who's spent a lot of their time looking into their subject already. That is what they want to see. And then lastly, oh no, I think we do have we've got a clip from, and this is basically just an introduction from our medical tutors. So these guys were running the seminars each week, and this is the introduction to explain what they're there for.
So the aims of these whole enrichment supervisions are supposed to be 24. It's supposed to guide you throughout your application with your wider reading. So everyone knows that you have to do wider reading to support your medical application, to sort of demonstrate that you have an insight into medicine. But the other thing that these enrichment supervisions will do is supposed to help you increase your confidence in discussing these different aspects of your wider reading, because that's what you're going to be asked to do at interview. So I think the best place to start building up your confidence is probably on here and talking in this group. And hopefully throughout all of the wider reading that we'll be doing with you, you'll be feeling a bit more prepared for life as a medical student and as a doctor as well.
Yeah, that last point is really important. The things that you learn here aren't only relevant to this application process. What you do find is a lot of people will be very focused on the application, will be drilling everything towards the application, and you're sort of learning to the test. But actually, a better way to do it is to just be the best candidate that they have, right? If you're the strongest candidate they get that day, you're going to be getting an offer. And this is really there to help build that. And they're very, very interactive. We really want students engaging with these things and developing into strong, very strong students. Which brings us on to our day courses lastly, James.
Yeah, absolutely. So within the program, we also have the intensive courses. So these happen a little bit later in the year, closer to the various deadlines of your application. So for example, if you're interviewing in the first 2 weeks of December for Oxbridge, you would be coming along to the interview course in November. So the idea of the intensive course is really to consolidate everything that you've been doing over the year and give you that final push to make sure that you're fully prepared. So there are intensive courses for the personal statement, specifically for the test, and then also for the interview. Also, there's an opportunity to do a bit of sort of cross comparison, work collaboratively as well. And I think that a lot of feedback we get is they're just a nice way to sort of bookmark the application before the sort of deadlines.
It's a bit like doing a practice driving test with your driving instructor before the real thing. You want to just have that last opportunity to see, is there anything else that needs sorting out? If you do, then you've got a couple of weeks to work on it with your tutor and make sure that it is. But hopefully you come out of these courses thinking, I am ready to do this. I'm absolutely ready. I've done everything I need to do. And that's pretty much it in terms of the stuff that we put into our programs. Ultimately, we do ask a lot of our students. We expect them to work very hard, but the point of it is that it pays off in the end. The point of it is that once you go through the process, once you're out the other end, you are far more likely to be receiving an offer if you've put in the kind of effort which we ask of our students. Now, lots of students will do this application all on their own, and some of them will still get an offer. So, 18% is the average acceptance rate, but you need to make sure that you're not missing out just because you weren't doing the right things. I see lots of students with fantastic potential, fantastic, intelligent young students who aren't told about this, who aren't told to prepare, who sort of are told the test is coming the week before, and they really miss out on a good opportunity. Very often we help them the next year when they want to reapply, and we get them in, because it's all about making sure you're equipped with the right tools for the job. And actually, if you look at how that sort of compares, so anyone who's interested, I'm always interested in sort of schools and that dynamic, but if you're interested in having a look at your own school, this is stuff that Oxford publishes. So you can Google this and you can find this. Cambridge does it as well. So you can, and they publish it about all schools, international, UK based, and you can see the kind of offer rates. And you can see that even the top schools, someone like Eton, that 32% offer rate is pretty good, but there's absolutely room for improvement there. And it's through focusing on mostly focusing on the test and the interviews. And that's where we really focus. And that's why I think we see such a big difference. But yeah, it does get harder as you have a larger and larger cohort. And if you're, well, not very easy, but easier to get 50% acceptance rate if you're sending 2 students. If you're sending 130 like Eton do, then you can understand why slightly less, slightly lower acceptance rate. It's worth bearing in mind that we usually have a cohort of a few hundred students, and we're still able to make sure that each of them stand a really good chance. James, can you tell them about our ideal student?
Yeah, definitely. So, clearly there are benchmarks in terms of the academic requirements for these courses, but actually I think an ideal student for us is somebody who's really, really passionate about studying the subject that they've chosen, and really, really wants to work hard to give themselves the best chance of ultimately, getting an offer. So that's really what I'm looking for. When I'm chatting with students, that's something that's really, really clear quite often straight away, whether this is something that students are really, really passionate about, or whether there's something that students just sort of feel that they have to do, or maybe they've sort of been pushed into doing. So somebody who's passionate about studying a subject would absolutely be my ideal student, because we're confident that we can prepare you effectively. So you just got to be sort of committed to want to put in the work as well.
Yeah, invariably, pretty much every year, I'll get from one of the students that I've taken on, I usually get a message or two saying, absolutely ecstatic that I got in, but pretty shocked because there were students in my class with better GCSEs than me that didn't. And my answer is always, well, they definitely won't have put in the effort that you did. There's lots of complacent people with very strong GCSEs who sort of think their work is done. And that is where, if you're sat there thinking, yeah, my GCSEs were good, but I know that there will be people with better GCSEs, you should know there is a direct thing you can do to help combat that. You got to make sure you do better than them on the test. You got to make sure you do better than them on the interview, and then actually their GCSEs aren't going to be as important. And we do have, so whenever we take on a student, as we've alluded to a few times, so we always have to speak to students before we're ready to accept them onto a program. We always need to make sure that they are ready for this, they are committed, and they're going to make the most of it. We don't want students on programs who aren't going to be working hard. But once you're on, we've got what we call the student honor code, which basically just gives the student a bit of responsibility for themselves. Where they're agreeing, I will do, when my tutor sets me work, I'm going to do it. And ultimately this is for their own good, because actually it's going to take a lot longer if you're not doing work in between tutorials. Another one is, I will tell my tutor if we have to move a tutorial around. That's really important, because these tutors are very, very, they've got better things to do than to be waiting around for an hour because you didn't show up. But of course, it's a really strong relationship between the student and the tutor, but that means respecting each other, making sure that you're working together properly. So the student honor code is quite important to us. But again, as I've said a few times, the student should be the driving force here. We're supplying you with the tools. We're making sure you have everything you need, but you need to pick those tools up and use them. That's really, really important. It's worth saying that we've got some pretty nice reviews on Trustpilot. I think, James, you were promised one week a very glowing review. Did it ever show up?
I'm devastated. No,
Devastated.
I'm waiting for my name to appear.
Okay.
If anybody sort of feels out the kindness of their heart they would like to mention me in a review, please do.
Yeah, and ultimately, so it's worth saying that we don't recommend programs for everyone. There will be certain students that come our way, and for whatever reason, we might have to say, look, I don't think this is the best thing for you. I don't think our programs is going to be right for you. But we will still do our best to give you advice, make sure that you're doing the right thing. I will often say to students, look, I don't think our support is right for you, but please, whatever you do, start now. Start doing it now, because it's going to help. And ultimately, if it is just something as little as that, a 30-minute conversation, if you want to let us know how it goes, please do, because we're always waiting to hear how we're doing and if there are ways that we can improve it. If you like this, for example, you're more than welcome to leave a review. The last thing to talk about is, well, I think it might be the last thing. We might have another one coming up. But the last thing to talk about in terms of like how things work for the program is our cooling off period. So ultimately, James and I and the rest of the team do the best we can to help explain, help make sure that the student and the parents understand what they're getting into and how it's all going to work. But ultimately, there's no substitute for just trying it and giving it a go. But that's quite a leap of faith. And it's also a leap of faith for us. Whilst we do our best to assess students, we aren't infallible and we can get it wrong sometimes. So in the first 2 weeks of a student's program, they have the opportunity to have up to 2 tutorials, go to the seminars those weekends, have a look through all the resources, catch up on previous seminars, really sink their teeth into it. And if it's not quite right, either for you or for us, the first thing we'll do is we'll talk about it. So if you come to us and you say, everything's fine, but there's X, Y, and Z that isn't working, and I'm just not sure about it. If it's something we can fix, then absolutely we will. And of course, we'll be doing that all the way through your program. If there's ever an issue, we will fix it. If you don't quite get along with your tutor, for whatever reason, we'll reselect a tutor to make sure that that's right. But if it's something that we can't fix, if it's something which, it just isn't going to work, we don't want students in programs that aren't helping them. What is the point at that point? And so you have this option to really get a good sense of how it all works. And if it doesn't work, then you withdraw, we refund you completely. The main thing we ask is if you've had books sent to you, we ask you to send them back. That's pretty much it. Okay. And again, it is really important, if James or I enroll a student and they arrange 2 tutorials in the first 2 weeks, and each time they're a no-show and they're not going to seminars, and you start to think, well, actually, is this right for them? Because it absolutely needs to be right for the student. That's the key thing. Now, outside of our paid programs, we also have what we call the UniAdmissions Foundation. So last year, we supported 93 students in full programs for free. This year, we're hoping to support 250 students. If you're wondering about sort of the price of our support, and I'm sure there's probably a couple of questions that we'll get through later about that, the short answer is it depends. It could be as much as nothing if you're foundation eligible, ranging up to quite a lot more than nothing. But it really depends on you and what you need and what we think is going to be the best for you in your application. So if you are thinking that this might be something which is right for you, the next step would be to book a consultation, have a chat with me, James, or one of the rest of the team, and we'll see actually if there's something there that works. If money is an issue, obviously these are not easy times for everyone. But if money is an issue, then it's highly likely that we'll be able to support you for free. And actually, we really want to. We didn't, our target last year was 100 students. Now, we didn't reach that target, not because, we didn't want to, but because we didn't have enough students apply. So again, if you're watching this and you know someone who's applying and you know that they've not got much money to spend on something like this and they've been hit particularly by COVID, then tell them about the foundation. It might be worth them making an application, because if we can support them for free, wouldn't that be great? And we've got plenty of spaces still on. It's just first come, first serve, really. So the earlier you apply, the sooner you can get going. Now, this should, I know what this means. So this is a GIF running in the background to let you know how to book a consultation. So if you see it's on our website, there's lots and lots of, opportunities to have a chat with us. But the easiest thing is to click that book a consultation thing and pick a time. What will happen is me or one of the team will give you a call at that time, have a chat about your application, really understand what's going on. And that's the best way to work out what's right for you. While that's going to run on repeat, whilst that's doing that, let's go through some of your questions. James, anything else to add before we go into the questions?
No, I have noticed some very specific questions. So I would say that if you have a lot of questions that are very specific to you, have a consultation. Come and talk to one of us. It's an opportunity for us to explore your application, answer those questions that are really quite specific, and see whether it's something that we can help you with. Because I think everybody else might be a little bit not want to hear about the minutiae of TSA, for example, if they're applying for medicine.
And one thing to add to that is sometimes people can be quite frustrated with me when they ask me a question and I can't give them a simple yes or no. Because obviously everyone wants a simple yes or no. Should I do this? Yes or no? But ultimately, I'm going to need to know a lot more about you before I can make genuine recommendations. I don't want to be telling you something which is misinformed, because it almost always depends. So yeah, absolutely. Have a chat with us and we'll go through it. The more general questions, though, we'll absolutely tackle. So someone has asked, this year, more students have high GCSE as compared to previous years due to the predicted grade nature. Will it make a difference in Oxford applications? So it has, and I think will definitely make a difference to the applications, is the short answer. The long answer is what we're seeing, particularly over this sort of last 2 years. It's been happening gradually, but particularly last application cycle, and we anticipate this application cycle as well. There's more and more emphasis on the tests and the interviews. That pie chart used to look a little bit different, a little bit more in favor of grades, but actually we've seen a focus move away from that as we have these issues. Now, the reason being is actually for this year's cohort, Oxford only has one standardized test to measure everyone on, and it will be the admissions test. The GCSEs are no longer standardized because no one sat them. They only have the test as a genuine objective metric for evaluating their students before interview. And if they're having to get rid of 75% of candidates, they're going to be using that very heavily. And this is why we stress, look, it's not about trying to sneak in, it's about putting in the work, working hard and getting results. So if you're going to work anywhere, work on that. We've got another one asking, this year, no AS examination. So how Cambridge will decide on UMS as they previously used to. Do you think kids with all A stars in GCSE are better to apply to Oxford for medicine this year rather than Cambridge? Okay, good question. There are no AS examinations, that is true, but actually most people have stopped sitting AS exams or stopped sitting AS exams a couple of years ago. I know certainly because I've seen the professor reports for Oxford, and AS results are the least important thing in the decision. So I haven't seen a direct report from Cambridge, but I would imagine it's slightly similar, and that they are relying more on GCSEs and predicted grades. And I think that's partly because not everyone is sitting AS exams anymore. So, it's not only an unstandardized test, which everyone sits, it's just a test that only a small proportion of people are sitting. So it becomes less and less explanatory for them. If you have all A stars in GCSE and you've been working on the BMAT, then like we said earlier, you might be better off applying to Oxford if you have no preference. And again, for the reason that actually you might sneak past, well, not sneak past, but you're going to get to this next round and lots of other people won't. However, if you're not too sure about your BMAT, you're not doing much preparation for it, you're doing it on your own, you're not doing that well in past papers, and you're not going to be getting any support, then actually you might be safer off applying to Cambridge. The one thing to bear in mind is this year, same as last year, but unlike previous years, you can't sit the BMAT before you submit your application. So unlike the UCAT, where you know your score as you make your application, you have no idea how well it's going to go. So if you're not sure how well you're doing on the BMAT, if you're very confident in your BMAT, apply to Oxford. If you're not, maybe Cambridge is a more sensible way to go. James, are there any questions that are jumping out at you?
There are some quite specific questions.
Okay.
Let's have a look. Well, will we post the recording of the lecture? Yes, we will.
Yeah, so you should, I think normally it's either on the website or you might get an email about it in a few days' time. But if you can't find the recording, then just drop us an email.
Yeah, and actually I'm seeing a couple of different questions about colleges. So actually 2 weeks ago, we did have one of these open days where we were discussing the colleges and the differences between them. So do look out for that. I think on the website, am I right, Will, you can actually see the sort of historic open days that we've had?
Yes, so I don't know off the top of my head exactly how to access it, but there certainly should be a way for you to have a look through previous ones.
Yeah.
If you can't, then again, drop us an email at info@UniAdmissions and we should be able to send you in the right direction.
Yeah.
We're not, because that was again another hour on choosing colleges. We're not going to be able to do that today, but I mean the short answer is do your research, visit, have a look around, and make the decision based on where you want to be. More than anything else. So you might just really want to be at one college, and that's good enough. I chose my college because it was very, very pretty, and that was enough.
Well, also, Will, we do have an Oxbridge college selection course as part of our program, because this is a question that comes up a lot. And it's a source of a lot of stress, I think, for students feeling like they're going to make the wrong choice in terms of college.
Yeah.
So we do have a half-day course to help you make a more informed decision about the college that you should apply to.
Absolutely, and we also have a book as well. So if you're not coming on one of our programs, you're not accepted or whatever it is, and you're still interested in finding out more, we do have a book, which is it's a guide to all the different colleges at Oxford and Cambridge. We have had a question about the final offer. So I see one relevant to medicine, but I think I've seen another one. Now, obviously, once you get beyond the interview stage, the interview is the most recent thing, but they will be considering your application as a whole. Okay, so it's not you get to interview and then it's only the interview that matters. It's still considered holistically across the board. So if you remember the pie chart, that's kind of the way that they're looking things right at the end. Naturally, before you get to interview, the pie chart for the Oxford professors is basically 50% test, 50% GCSEs. That's what it is. But that once we get the new information from the interview, that then shifts along and it takes up space. Okay, so yeah, they're still going to be looking at you holistically. If you do very poorly in the interview, because it's so highly weighted, it is going to make things difficult. But if you're very, very strong otherwise, you might still stand a chance. Okay. Let's have a looky here. So
there's another one about sort of taking a gap year for somebody who was unfortunately unsuccessful with getting into Cambridge and medicine. So I think you touched on this earlier, didn't you, Will? It's about making effective use of your gap year, isn't it? Demonstrating that you've been engaging with medicine, not just having a lovely holiday.
Yeah, and my apprehension and the reason why I'm my advice at the moment is a bit blanket, don't do a gap year, is because it's so difficult to find something useful to do these days. Now, hopefully that's going to change as we move out of lockdown, but particularly this last year, and potentially even next year as well, it's really difficult to predict these things. But if you wanted work experience, if you wanted internships, there were few and far between. And, whenever a company or a business or university is offering out internships and they have to cut some, it's always the 16, 17-year-olds opportunities that are going to be cut first, because they've obviously got 21-year-old graduates who deserve or need more attention. So it is difficult these days to find this kind of thing. If you know that you're going to be able to set something up, then it's a matter of evaluating how beneficial that is. If you know you're not, then it's tricky. It's worth saying as well, there's a lot to be said about the post-university gap year. So you can always do your university and then have a bit of a break. Medics will of course be going on electives, so they get a nice long, well, they are working, but it is very much seen as a holiday. We've got a question about how difficult is it for international students to get into Oxbridge? Now, you know, some of you might be UK based. I'm sure a handful of you are watching this from abroad. There's a few nuances here. So for medicine in particular, the GMC, the General Medical Council, puts a cap on the number of international medics every university can accept. So for Oxford, it's 14. For Cambridge, it's 21. For somewhere like Birmingham, it's about 28. What this means is if you are the 15th best applicant in the world to Oxford, they can't give you a place. Even if you're better than every single one of the UK students, they can't give you a place. And it means that the competition is really high. So the overall acceptance rate for medicine in the UK is about 10 to 12%. So it's pretty low already. For internationals, it drops down to between 2 and 5%, depending on the university. So that is difficult. How do you overcome this? You have a very good BMAT. No questions asked, you need a very good BMAT, and you need to be pretty dazzling at interview. So a lot of work goes into it. Outside of that, it's still difficult because obviously there are a lot more applicants from the whole world in comparison. But it is still difficult to stand out, but there's no sort of, there's no objective limits on the number of international students that they'll take on. It's just you're in a big pool of people. It is also often difficult for international students because if you're international, it's less likely that your school can do anything about this. Schools in the UK, it's really broad. Some schools do loads of support, some schools do a little bit, some schools do none. International schools, you know, very often you're the only one going to the UK or something along those lines, so there is less support to help you with that. Okay, we've got a good one. When is the right time to start your program? So depends a bit on what's going on. So if you're hoping to apply this year for 2022 entry, I'd have a chat with us as soon as possible. Now, ultimately, whenever we're talking with students, it's all about making the most of the time that they have and making sure that the program that we're recommending fits that and fits for them. We have some students that we support for 6 months, some we support for 12 months. Ultimately, the student that we support for 12 months and the student that we support for 6 months, they both have to be doing the same stuff. If a student comes to us for 6 months, we're not going to improperly prepare them for the test just because they're around for less time, but they're going to have to do more on a weekly basis in order to make sure they do everything. What we normally say, and again, it depends from subject to subject, but what we normally say is we'd expect a student to be spending from at least 150 to 250 hours on their Oxbridge application. So the later you start, the more you have to do a week, and the more difficult it is, the less well you learn it, and the more you're going to have to, you know, sacrifice stuff at school, and the more this is going to encroach on school. The earlier you start, the more time you have, the more consistent your learning is, the better your learning is, and you're able to juggle it alongside everything else. Okay. Certainly give yourself as much time as you need, and then give yourself more. That is the overall rule of thumb.
I would also say, just to add to that, Will, that it's not only the amount of time that you're preparing, it's how effective your preparation is. And students, you know, every year, especially with students who have been sort of unfortunate and haven't got an offer, who come to us, one of the things they say is that not having a structure makes preparing effectively so difficult. And it's sort of quite logical that that would be the case. So I think having a really clear structure for yourself allows you to prepare a lot more effectively, you know, in a shorter or longer period of time. So that's the slight caveat to the length of time, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And also for students that we're not supporting, you will probably, because you're going to be less effective and less efficient, you're probably going to need to spend more time than the hours that I quoted before, because you're never going to be as effective as when you've got a tutor sort of helping you and guiding you. Okay, we've got a question. On A-level results day, are you expected to meet the course entry requirements or your predicted grades? Good question. So if it was predicted grades, I'd have been in trouble. Ultimately, what you are expected to meet is your what you've been asked for. So come January, you will hopefully, if you do everything right, you will get an offer. And that offer will say, you know, thank you very much for your application. You have been successful. We would like to offer you a place for September 2022 on the condition that you achieve these grades. Now, by and large, what they ask for is the same as the course entry requirements. Very rarely, and this becomes less and less common each year, very rarely would they pump it up. The only scenario, and it has happened in the past, but again, it doesn't happen very often. But the only scenario where they might say, actually, you can only join if you actually hit your predicted grades is if they're not convinced that you will hit your predicted grades. If it's in the kind of scenario where actually we're not sure you're going to achieve what you've said you will, and if you don't, then the rest of your application wasn't strong enough. But if you do actually, and you surprise us, then we would be quite interested in you. That is, I don't really know why I mention it, because it's happened so infrequently that it's not even worth talking about, but it has happened. So, you know, why not talk about it? For context, my predicted grades were 3 A stars and a D2, which is basically just 4 A stars. And I got 2 A stars and a D3, which is 2 A stars and 2 A's. But the entry requirements was A star, AA. So I got my offer. Okay. James, anything jumping out?
So there's some sort of, again, some questions that I think are quite specific. I would urge you, if we don't answer your question, please do get in contact and have a chat. And also, you know, sometimes we'll get a question like, which is better? And I think that's quite a difficult question to answer. There's
very easy for me.
There's a lot of information that, you know, we would need to be able to say, is this going to be better or worse for you? That would be very hard to just say, yes, this course is better than this course without any context at all. So please, you know, have a chat with us and we'll explore your situation more.
There is an interesting question that I've seen just pop up about asking, do most successful applicants have 4 A levels? Now, 4 A levels is an interesting one. This comes up very often. It's relevant for certain subjects. So there are certain subjects where you are going to be better off doing 4 A levels. And the reason being is there are certain subjects where you should be doing further maths. So if you want to do maths, you should be doing further maths. And they don't really accept further maths as a A level when it's not bound with 3 others. So if you do further maths and physics, that's sort of seen as quite like a 2.5. So you'd want to do further maths, physics, and another one. So if you're doing maths, please do further maths. If you want to do economics, you probably actually, you're going to have a higher chance if you're doing further maths. If you're doing something like natural sciences, then it's helpful to have 4 A levels, because natural sciences is a very broad thing, and you want to, you know, try and demonstrate that you can do that. Outside of those, the 4th A level doesn't add as much as it costs in terms of the amount of effort you're putting into it. You're adding sort of 33% of your workload that year in terms of A levels alone on top. You're not getting an improvement in your chances of 33%. And actually, sometimes when I speak with students, we have to have a really frank discussion about workload and capacity. Because ultimately, if doing that 4th A level means that you can't spend any time on the test, it's not worth it. It's causing more problems than it's worth. If you can do the 4 A levels, and you can do the test, and you can do preparation for the interviews and everything else, then fine. But it's important to be realistic. It's important to be able to gauge yourself. And, you know, we're always here to say, look, it sounds like you can't handle all of this. The 4th A level is not worth the trouble that it's giving you. Again, individual kind of circumstances. If you said, should I do 4 A levels, I'd need to speak with you. So please do have a chat with us, and we'll be able to go through that.
I've just seen a question here, Will, asking, do we support applicants to other universities as well? And yeah, we do. I mean, for the competitive courses, you know, that require these sort of tests, In interviews, yeah, absolutely we do. So in the case of sort of medicine and economics and things like that, where there are admissions tests outside of Oxbridge, then yeah, absolutely we do.
Yeah, and again, it's all about a discussion. We have a few students that we help internationally as well, so who aren't applying to the UK. These admissions tests have started to become quite popular across the world. So there's a medical school in Spain that uses the BMAT. There's a university, I think, in Finland that uses the TSA. So these are starting to crop up. And the reason why admissions tests were first introduced was because the courses were being applied to by so many strong candidates that it was impossible to tell them apart. Now, as we have a huge ceiling effect with GCSEs and A-level results, other universities are now starting to find that. So there are certain universities that use the MAT. More and more universities are using the LNAT. And definitely, if there's something like that part of your application, have a chat with us. We'll see what we can do to help. And yeah, naturally, particularly when it comes to medicine, it's great when our students get an offer from Oxford or from Cambridge, but actually I'm much happier when they get offers from all of them, because that's when we've done everything right. We've got a question about, do many successful applicants have an EPQ? So EPQs are, again, it falls into that workload capacity discussion. An EPQ isn't going to make you look weaker, isn't going to make your application less good. It's only going to help, but it's not going to help if it stops you from preparing for the TSA. We've talked about E&M, the TSA is vital. You want to be getting, if you're below 40, you really don't stand a chance at a 50. You want to be pumping that right up as close to 50 as possible. And that's going to take time. That's going to take practice. So if the EPQ is stopping you from doing that, then we have to have a discussion about whether or not the EPQ is worth it. We've got one question asking, how easy is it to switch a course at Oxbridge if I am not interested in it once I am admitted? Now, people who ask me are often thinking about trying to get in for a non-competitive course and then swap over. So if anyone's done their homework, they'll know that classics has a 50% acceptance rate. Now you might be thinking, well, that sounds pretty good. I want to do chemistry, but what I'm going to do is I'll get in for classics and I'll swap over. It's not going to work if the courses are radically different. There is capacity for changing. So one of my friends got a deferred offer to do linguistics and a language. I can't remember which language it was. And during that deferred year, swapped it over to PPL, which is psychology, philosophy, and linguistics. But if she had tried to move over to engineering, it wouldn't have worked. So that is that's the answer, really. I wouldn't try and sneak in for a subject which is completely different just because it's got a higher acceptance rate. I'm sure that's not what you were trying to do, but just to anyone who's considering it, be wary.
The question about the students who are doing IB. So yeah, I mean, if you're doing the IB, increasingly more and more schools are starting to use the IB. It's becoming more of a popular thing. Ultimately, it's the same as your A levels. If you're doing A levels, you have to meet the minimum sort of benchmark that the university set for your course. You can find that on the course page that you're interested in. But again, then it's about really making sure that you're the strongest candidate in your test and in your interview to back up a strong academic score. Because again, as we looked at in the pie charts, academics are important, but they are only 30% of the puzzle.
There is a question about someone who was unsuccessful for Cambridge for medicine this year. Look, it happens. It's a really competitive course. So I appreciate your son's probably disappointed, but if he got to interview, he was amongst some of the strongest candidates the world has to offer. So that is something for him to hold on to. I think it would be great for you to have a chat with one of us, because actually, it all depends. If he's got an offer from somewhere, I would err on the side of caution and consider taking it. Now, ultimately, it's his decision what he wants to do. But if he's got an offer to do medicine at Imperial, I'd be tempted to go with that. The thing about medicine, once you're on the other side, once you graduate, if you want to be a doctor, if a student says to me, I want to be a doctor, that is all I want to do, it doesn't actually matter where you study. Everyone comes out of it at the other end the same. Now, if you want to be a researcher, clinical researcher, then I can understand why there are definitely certain universities which are more geared towards that. His gap year will not necessarily have a negative impact on his application. I would encourage applying to perhaps Oxford instead, or at least applying to a different college. But I would definitely encourage having a proper chat about this, because again, we can't give too much specific advice without a bit of back and forth and a bit of understanding as to what happened last year. Because we need to take a bit of a dive into that. And there's lots of lovely people here, and we want to make sure that we're being as informative for all of them as possible. Anyone that you've got your eye on, James? I've noticed a relatively quick and easy one. Yeah. Someone asking, do the 2 universities have graduate entry in medicine for international students? I assume you mean Oxford and Cambridge. The short answer is yes. There are quite a few medical schools that offer graduate entry medicine. There is one additional complication of the GAMSAT. Some universities ask for the GAMSAT at graduate entry. But yeah, certainly you could apply to either.
So somebody's asking what a consultation actually involves. Well, what a consultation is just an opportunity for us to discuss you a little bit more, find out a little bit more about you and your application. It's an opportunity for you to ask questions, but ultimately we want to determine whether we would be able to support you and what the sort of best program would be to give you the best chance. And in order to do that, we need to sort of find out a little bit more about you. So it's very sort of, it's a chat. There's no sort of pressure. It's just an opportunity to explore you and your application a bit more and to see whether we would be a good fit for each other, essentially.
Yeah, it's worth saying, you know, if I'm speaking to a new student and they seem really promising and they seem like they're not getting much help, I will probably get quite excited about the opportunity to help them. And we will become quite keen to help you. Because we see lots of students not reach their full potential, and ultimately this is what it's all about. So it may be that we come to the end of it and we say, look, I don't think there's anything we can do for you, but please do X, Y, and Z. It might also be that we say, well, look, it's been really good speaking with you. I think there's something we could do here to help you. And it's there because, you know, we don't make recommendations to everyone. We don't accept everyone, but when we do accept you, it's because we genuinely believe that one of our programs will help you get an offer. I don't make recommendations to people who I don't think stand a chance regardless of the programs. I don't make recommendations to people who I don't think need the programs. Someone has asked, can we do a 4-year A100 course and then apply to Oxford or Cambridge in our 5th year? I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. So one thing to bear in mind is that actually that would be quite strange. So Oxford and Cambridge do their medical degrees quite differently to most other medical schools. So a 4th year at Oxford or Cambridge is actually kind of like a 3rd year in most other places, because they are slower. It's a slower degree. There's not really a system of, I think in the States, there's quite a system of sort of transferring from uni to uni. They don't really do that in the UK as far as I'm aware. And also you'd be applying with an incomplete degree. I mean, you can apply, as in apply in your 5th year. So I suppose you could, during your 5th year, you could apply to go to Oxford or Cambridge as like for a master's or a postgraduate, that's fine. If you're ever doing an undergraduate and you wanted to go into postgraduate or afterwards, you would have to make your application in your last year, because your last year finishes in July, then you presumably want to start in September. So if that's what you're talking about, then you can make an application to Oxford or Cambridge in your 5th year. But you've already graduated as a medic by then. I don't know, you know, obviously you do what you want to do, but I don't know the scenario. Might be worth more of an explanation over the phone. Right, James, can you pick out 2 more questions that you want to answer? I'll pick out 2 more questions that I want to answer. If anyone wants to rush in anything else, try and make it something new. But yeah, we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon.
Sure. So somebody's asked, how often do you offer one-to-one tuition? Again, I'm sorry that I can't be more specific, but it really depends on you, and it depends on how much support you need. Maybe you need support with your whole application. Maybe you just need some quite specific support. Therefore, the recommendation would very much depend on that. And that's the purpose of having a chat together, just to find out, what would actually work for you and have an impact.
Yeah, nice. Again, we're not trying to be like difficult. We're not trying to not give answers, but we know that actually if we say to you, you should do X number of tutorials a week, that might not be the right advice. And it really does depend a lot on you. Let's see.
So somebody's asking about Oxford giving interview offers based on GCSEs and the MAT.
Yeah.
So I guess we're looking at sort of computer science or maths here, and yeah, just like the pie chart suggests, they don't interview everybody. They interview quite a small sort of proportion of those students who apply. So yeah, they're going to be looking at your MAT result, and they're going to be looking at your academics as well to make a decision.
All right, that's your 2. I've got one here. So someone's asked, when do you find out your Oxford TSA score? Is it after the interview? So more generally, I'm going to make a point about when you find out your test scores overall. So UCAT, most people applying for that will know you get it pretty much straight away. The other admissions tests, you don't really find out your score. So I didn't find out my TSA score until I knew I had an offer. So at that point, I wasn't too fussed. But they are, so you don't find out right away, like with the UCATs. They do, so when you sit the BMAT, obviously that score does get sent off to the universities, and then you find the BMAT out usually right at the end of November, they publish it. But actually the sort of Oxford and Cambridge specific tests, you don't normally hear until Jan, Feb. And that's often as part of wider feedback of, well done. So that is, that's important to bear in mind. It is a bit stressful not knowing, but my advice is actually work hard, put your effort in, get to the interview, do the interview in December, and then just enjoy the Christmas holidays. Don't think about it. Don't spend your whole time fretting about whether or not you get an offer, because that will make no difference to whether or not you get an offer. Look after yourself, enjoy yourself, and be content with the fact that you put in your all, you gave it your best shot. And if you made it, you deserved it. If not, Imperial isn't the worst place in the world. Durham isn't the worst place in the world. There will be other places where you can do fantastically. There's a one here saying where specifically on the website there are recordings of your previous open days. I can't, so I'm not very good at multitasking in terms of having the thingy up and going through my screen. It should be, hopefully it's quite easy to navigate. If not, drop us an email and we'll be able to help you out with that. And then one more is asking about interview formats between Oxford and Cambridge. Broadly speaking, they're pretty similar. The kind of interview you get is going to vary from college to college. So, and that's all dependent on what that individual college tutor decides is a good way to measure people. One college might, if you're scientific, they might bring a research paper and give you 20 minutes to read a research paper before you go into the interview and then talk about that. Other colleges might not. But again, there's variety within the universities. So naturally, one college at Oxford will be different from one college at Cambridge, but not necessarily that much different from another college at Cambridge. Okay. All right, marvelous. So someone's just very quickly said, you don't find out the actual score you got in the test for Oxford, you find out later, basically. You don't find out right away. Usually, yeah, I think it's January or February that you get it. I'm afraid we are going to have to wrap things up there. It's really great that you've all interacted, been asking lots of questions. It's always more fun for us when we can tell you guys stuff. If there are more things that you're curious about, if there are more questions that you have, please do speak with us directly. Equally, we will be running another one of these. What did I say it was about? I think it was about interviews. So there have been quite a few questions about interviews. So absolutely, if that's something that you're a bit interested about, a bit intrigued, haven't heard too much about, please do come along next week and we'll be able to talk about it then. Okay, brilliant. Well, yeah, James, thank you very much for coming along.
Yeah, it's been good.
And thank you everyone else for spending your time with us. Please enjoy the rest of your weekend, whatever you're up to. And I'm sure we'll hopefully see some of you next week. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.